Welcome back to the Survival Historian, where the grit of human endurance meets the weight of our past. Today we stand before the ruins of empires, where the clash of civilizations wasn't decided by cavalry charges or pitched battles alone, but by something far more deliberate and brutal: the siege. Imagine a world where cities were literally impenetrable, or were they? For centuries, the greatest minds of the ancient world poured their genius into two opposing pursuits: building walls that could never fall, and devising engines of war that could tear them down. What emerged was a relentless arms race of ingenuity, where survival meant mastering both stone and strategy, where starvation was as deadly as any blade, and where a single breach could determine the fate of thousands. This is the story of ancient siege warfare, where engineering prowess became the ultimate weapon of survival. The impermeable walls, ancient fortification masterpieces. The history of fortification begins not with grandeur but with desperation. Early settlements ringed themselves with simple wooden palisades and earthen banks, crude barriers against raiders and wild beasts. But as civilizations grew and warfare intensified, these humble defenses evolved into architectural marvels that still inspire awe millennia later. Stone replaced wood, single walls became concentric layers, and defensive thinking transformed from merely keeping enemies out to creating killing zones where attackers would be systematically destroyed. Ancient engineers understood principles that modern military architects still respect. Walls were built thick rather than tall, sometimes measuring 20 feet across, because width resisted battering rams and undermining far better than height alone. They incorporated curves and angles to eliminate blind spots, ensuring defenders could rain projectiles on any attacker brave or foolish enough to approach. Gates, the weakest points in any defensive system, were staggered and offset, forcing invaders into narrow corridors where they became easy targets. Watchtowers punctuated the perimeter at regular intervals, providing overlapping fields of observation and fire. The Theodosian walls of Constantinople represent the pinnacle of this defensive philosophy. Constructed in the 5th century, this triple-layered system stretched nearly 4 miles and stood as an impenetrable barrier for over 1,000 years. The outer wall rose 40 feet, backed by a second wall 25 feet high, with a final inner fortification reaching heights of 40 feet. Between these barriers lay open spaces designed to trap and expose attackers who breached the first line. Moats 60 feet wide and 20 feet deep surrounded the entire complex, while nearly 200 towers provided platforms for defenders to dominate the battlefield below. Standing before these walls, an attacking army would feel their hearts sink, knowing that survival meant conquering not one obstacle, but an entire ecosystem of engineered death. The art of the siege, early breaching strategies, well, it's really fascinating. Yet walls, no matter how formidable, were built by men and could be undone by men. The earliest siege tactics relied not on brute force, but on patience and psychology. Starvation was the oldest weapon in the besieger's arsenal. Armies would surround a city, cut its supply lines, and simply wait. Inside, as granaries emptied and cisterns ran dry, the real battle began. Not between soldiers, but between hope and despair. Children weakened first, then the elderly, and finally even the garrison troops found themselves too feeble to man the walls. Defenders would watch from their towers as crops were burned in surrounding fields, as relief columns were turned back, as the noose tightened day by grinding day. Deception walked hand in hand with deprivation. Attackers might parade supplies to demoralize defenders or spread false rumors of plague within the walls to erode morale. They launched propaganda offering generous surrender terms that, grew harsher with each passing week. The psychological toll was immense. Civilians turned against military leaders, factions formed, and, cities sometimes opened their gates from within simply to end the torment. This was warfare as endurance test, where the will to survive became, honestly, the ultimate battlefield. When patience failed, direct assault became necessary. Scaling ladders offered the simplest approach, just crude wooden constructions that soldiers would carry at a sprint toward walls while arrows and stones rained down. The first man up a ladder rarely survived, nor the second or third. Battering rams, suspended from wooden frames and covered with wet hides to resist fire, would pound rhythmically against gates and walls, each impact sending tremors through stone and, frankly, through the hearts of defenders. Miners, meanwhile, worked in darkness beneath the battlefield, tunneling toward foundations, shoring their passages with timber before setting those supports ablaze and collapsing sections of wall in spectacular, deadly cave-ins. Engineering the breakthrough, siege engines emerge. The true revolution in siege warfare came with the development of mechanical artillery. Greek and Hellenistic engineers pioneered torsion-powered weapons that transformed siegecraft from a labor-intensive slog to, a precision science. The ballista, essentially a massive crossbow mounted on a stand, could hurl iron-tipped bolts with such force that they would punch through shields, armor, and the men behind them. Crews of skilled operators adjusted tension, elevation, and aim, picking off defenders from hundreds of yards away, making the walls themselves no longer safe havens, but exposed shooting galleries. Catapults and later trebuchets brought a different kind of terror. These machines hurled stones weighing hundreds of pounds in high arcs over walls, smashing buildings, crushing defenders, and spreading panic through constant bombardment. The sound alone was psychologically devastating. The crack of release, the whistle of the projectile's flight, the thunderous impact, and the screams that followed. Roman engineers perfected the onager, a torsion catapult that could maintain sustained fire, turning siege warfare into a form of ancient artillery barrage. Perhaps most intimidating were siege towers, mobile fortresses on wheels that transformed the battlefield's vertical dimension. These massive wooden structures, sometimes rising as high as 9 stories and protected by iron plates and wet hides, rolled inexorably toward walls on teams of oxen or men. Inside, soldiers climbed in darkness, listening to arrows thud against the outer shell, waiting for the moment when drawbridges would drop and they would pour onto the battlements in a desperate melee. The helepolis, or city-taker, used at the Siege of Rhodes in 305 BCE, stood 135 feet tall and required thousands of men to operate. Imagine being a defender watching this mechanical mountain creep toward your position, knowing that when it arrived, survival would depend on brutal hand-to-hand combat with fresh troops while you were already exhausted from weeks of siege. Countering the onslaught? Defensive innovations. Defenders were far from passive victims. They developed countermeasures that turned sieges into deadly chess matches of move and counter-move. Greek fire, the Byzantine secret weapon, was an incendiary mixture that burned even on water, turning wooden siege engines into funeral pyres for their crews. Defenders would pour it from walls in streams of liquid flame, or launch it in ceramic pots that shattered on impact, spreading unquenchable fire across siege works. The psychological impact was profound. Attackers knew that one moment of carelessness could transform them into human torches. Boiling oil and heated sand were dumped on soldiers attempting to scale walls or operate rams. The oil caused horrific burns, while heated sand worked its way under armor and clothing, burning skin without mercy and impossible to remove in the chaos of combat. Long poles with hooks could overturn ladders, sending climbers plummeting to their deaths. Defenders also became expert counter-programmers. When attackers dug mines, defenders dug counter-mines, listening for enemy tunneling by placing bowls of water on the ground and watching for vibrations. Underground battles erupted in these claustrophobic passages, fought by torchlight with knives and picks in air so foul men would faint from lack of oxygen. The siege was as much about logistics and morale as engineering. Cities that prepared properly could hold out for years. They stockpiled grain in massive quantities, maintained multiple water sources, and rationed strictly. They rotated troops to prevent exhaustion, maintained civil order through martial law when necessary, and kept hope alive through religious ceremonies and displays of defiance. The unseen battle within the walls was constant, preventing disease, managing dwindling resources, suppressing panic, and, maintaining the collective will to survive just one more day. This required leadership, organization, and a kind of grim determination that, transformed ordinary people into hardened survivors. The legacy of siege warfare offers us lessons for modern resilience. The principles forged in ancient sieges, honestly, echo through history right into our present day. Modern fortifications still employ defense in depth, overlapping fields of fire, and the strategic use of terrain that ancient engineers pioneered. The psychological dimensions of siege warfare, the battle for morale and will, remain central to modern conflict and survival situations. When we study how cities like Constantinople held for over 1,000 years, or how the defenders of Masada chose death over surrender, we're examining the ultimate test of human endurance and collective survival. These ancient engineers understood something profound. Survival in extremis requires both physical preparation and mental fortitude. The walls were important, but equally crucial was the determination behind them. The siege engines were formidable, but meaningless without the courage to operate them under fire. In every siege, whether it lasted days or years, the outcome was determined by which side could endure longer, think more creatively, and adapt more rapidly to changing circumstances. Today, as we face our own challenges, whether natural disasters, social upheaval, or personal crises, the lessons of ancient siege warfare remain relevant. Prepare thoroughly, think systematically, work cooperatively, and, never underestimate the power of sustained will. The engineers who built Constantinople's walls and those who eventually breached them were engaged in the same fundamental human endeavor, using intelligence, ingenuity, and determination to survive against overwhelming odds. If this journey through ancient siege warfare has shown you anything, it's that survival has always been about more than just enduring. It's about innovating, adapting, and never surrendering to the impossible. The walls may have crumbled, the siege engines turned to dust, but the lessons they teach us about resilience, preparation, and the indomitable human spirit remain as solid as the stones themselves. If you found this exploration compelling, hit that like button. Share this video with fellow history and survival enthusiasts. And subscribe to The Survival Historian. We're building a community that understands how the past prepares us for the future, one incredible story at a time. Until next time, stay curious, stay prepared, and remember, history isn't just something that happened. It's a survival manual written in the struggles of those who came before us.